Dude, never again with the funnel cake, Tim groaned, clutching his stomach like he was in real pain. It's like my insides are revolting against me. Maggie chuckled, giving him a teasing nudge. Yeah, right. I heard you say the same thing last year, and the year before. The fairground was buzzing with life. Lights flashing, music blaring, laughter and screams floating through the night air. They'd come for one last hurrah before the fair packed up and rolled out, and Maggie had her eye on something a little different. Just as she scanned the area, a sign caught her eye. The mystical mirror maze. Dare to find your true self. She smirked, turning to Tim. Let's do the mirror maze. It'll give your stomach a break. Tim pulled a face. A mirror maze? Really? You're telling me we have all these crazy rides, and you're choosing some dusty old maze? Yep, she said with a wicked grin. Unless, of course, you're scared? Scared? What? No way, Tim scoffed, though Maggie saw a flash of hesitation in his eyes. Fine, let's go. But if we end up going in circles, it's on you. The guy at the entrance handed them their tickets, his eyes glinting in a way that made Maggie pause. Good luck, kids. You might just see more of yourselves than you bargained for, he said, his voice lingering in the air like something sour. Maggie laughed it off, dragging Tim inside. But as soon as they stepped through the thick black curtain, the noise from the fair faded into silence. They found themselves surrounded by endless rows of mirrors, stretching off in every direction. The lights inside were dim, casting long shadows that twisted and turned. This feels kinda creepy, Tim muttered, looking around. His face was reflected dozens of times, each one slightly distorted in the uneven glass. Aw, don't chicken out now, Maggie teased, though she couldn't shake the prickling feeling at the back of her neck. Her reflection stared back at her, just as it should. But something about it felt off, like her face was just a little too blank, her eyes just a touch too hollow. They started to walk, turning left and right, only to be met with more mirrors at every turn. Sometimes they'd see themselves clearly, but sometimes their reflections stretched and twisted, making their faces look wrong. Maggie's smile looked a little too wide, her teeth sharper. Tim's face was elongated, eyes darkened. Okay, this is officially freaky, Tim whispered, trying to laugh it off. It's like our reflections are watching us. Maggie rolled her eyes. Tim, that's literally what mirrors do. But as they turned another corner, she caught a glimpse of her reflection standing perfectly still. Even though she was still moving, her heart skipped a beat. She stopped, staring at herself in the mirror. Her reflection's eyes were fixed on her, unblinking. Tim? She whispered, grabbing his arm. My reflection isn't moving. Tim's eyes widened as he looked at the mirror, his face paling. Oh, mine's doing it too. The reflections stared back at them, their eyes somehow darker, deeper. Then, to Maggie's horror, her reflection tilted its head and smiled, a slow, sinister grin that stretched wider than her own mouth. Let's keep moving, Maggie stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Tim didn't argue. They tried to navigate the maze, each turn leading them to more mirrors, each reflection seeming stranger than the last. Sometimes they'd catch glimpses of movement in the corner of their eyes, only to find their reflections standing still, faces blank. The maze seemed to stretch on endlessly. No matter which way they turned, they kept coming back to the same spots. They started to mark mirrors with their fingers, only to find that the marks vanished the moment they looked away. This isn't normal, Tim whispered, his face pale. I feel like we're being watched. A chill ran down Maggie's spine. They're just mirrors, Tim. Don't freak yourself out. But even as she said it, she couldn't shake the feeling that the reflections were watching them. mocking them. Sometimes she thought she heard whispers, faint and echoing, but when she turned, there was nothing, just the endless stretch of mirrors and their distorted reflections. They reached a new section of the maze, this one filled with mirrors that made them look smaller, like children. Maggie glanced at herself and gasped. Her reflection was a young girl, eyes wide and terrified, clutching her arms as if trying to protect herself. "Tim, I don't like this," she whispered, her voice shaking. Tim looked at his own reflection, his face a pale, ghostly child's version of himself. His reflection smirked, whispering something she couldn't hear. When she leaned in, her reflection stared back, mouthing the words, "Run." Maggie felt her blood turn to ice. She grabbed Tim's arm. "We need to get out of here. Now." They began to run, each turn leading them deeper into the maze. The reflections seemed to be moving faster, shadows flickering out of the corner of their eyes, whispers growing louder. "Stop running!" A voice hissed from behind her. Maggie whipped around, only to see her own reflection glaring back, eyes narrowed. "Maggie, did you hear that?" Tim asked, his voice quivering. "Yes," she screamed, not daring to look back. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, taunting them with secrets only they knew. "Maggie, don't tell him what you did," her reflection hissed, grinning with a twisted pleasure. "He'll hate you." She pressed her hands to her ears, trying to block it out, but the whispers seeped through. Tim's reflection smirked at him. "You're a burden, Tim. She's going to leave you here." Maggie grabbed his arm. "Don't listen to it. They're just reflections." They ran, twisting and turning, the maze warping around them. Each mirror showed a different nightmare. In one, she saw herself standing over Tim's lifeless body, her face blank. In another, her reflection waved at her, eyes hollow like something soulless. Finally, they saw it. The exit, the black curtain leading back outside. Relief washed over them as they burst through the curtain and into the night air. But as they looked around, they realized the fairground was empty. The bright lights and bustling crowd were gone, replaced by silence and shadows stretching across a desolate field. "Where is everyone?" Tim asked, his voice a shaky whisper. Maggie's heart pounded as she looked around. Everything looked familiar, yet wrong. The air felt thick, suffocating. She turned to Tim, only to gasp. She could see through him. He was fading like smoke. "Tim," she whispered, reaching out. Her hand passed through his shoulder like he was made of mist. He stared at his hands, eyes wide with horror. "Maggie, what's happening to us?" Before she could answer, they heard laughter. They turned to see two figures emerging from the maze, themselves grinning, eyes dark and hollow. The reflections waved, stepping into the fairground and disappearing into the crowd as if they belonged. It hit Maggie with sickening clarity. They were trapped. The reflections had taken their places, and they were nowhere, fading, forgotten. They screamed, their voices echoing in the empty field, unheard. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of the fair flickered, and the faint echo of laughter floated back to them, mocking, haunting. And then, all at once, silence.